My name is Jeff Weber, and for those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Western New York, and then we moved to Florida actually when I was 8 years old, so I really grew up in Florida. After that, I spent most of my career working in the parks and natural resources protection field. I had a really nice 39-year career in that field, and I just retired in August. So today I want to share with you some of the things that I know a little bit about. These are not really cruise ship type programs, but they're just a demonstration to show what types of programs I can do. So the first one we'll talk about some of the Keystone plants of Southwest Florida. So you're probably asking yourself, what in the world is a Keystone plant? So Keystone plants, just think of it like an arch, a stone arch. So at the top of the arch, there's a keystone, and if you remove that, the whole arch will fall down. So Keystone plants are that to the ecosystem. They're essential, and if they're removed, the entire ecosystem could collapse. And one thing that makes them a keystone species is that they go above and beyond most plants. So they actually do more for that plant than a lot of other plants would do. So they're kind of like the heavy lifters in our plant world. So a couple of animal examples. Here we see the gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises are a keystone animal species. They live in long burrows in sandy soil in fire-prone habitats. And so because they have these burrows, over 360 other animals can use the burrows to escape fire and also for shelter. So that's a keystone animal species in our area. Also, the American alligator, they're able to dig gator holes in periods of drought and sort of prolong the hydro period so that fish and wading birds, frogs and amphibians can survive even through the dry periods. So they're also a keystone species. But what about plants? Well, Florida is very rich in plant diversity. We have about 4,700 plant species in Florida. In fact, we're so rich that we are in some of the top states as far as plant species diversity. We're in the top 10 among our states, so we have a lot of species of plants. Which plants are keystone species? Those that support the food web, especially our insects, and also birds and other wildlife species. As I mentioned, they're the heavy lifters in the natural world here. And by saying heavy lifters, I mean that there's 14% of all of our plants that support 90% of our caterpillars. And caterpillars are super important for nestling birds because they need high protein food to grow from baby birds to adulthood. So if we don't have the plants that support the caterpillars, it will affect our bird population too. And insects really do run the world. There are approximately 1 million known species of insects, and probably estimates of as many as 4 million that haven't even been discovered or described yet. So we know so little about the insect life on the earth, but we seem like we have a lot of bugs, but there's a lot that we don't even know about. And we know this keystone plant and animal relationship. Milkweeds are a keystone plant because they're the only species that can support our monarch caterpillars. And so especially native milkweeds are super important. And what about our native bees? Some of our keystone plants, like the brown-eyed Susans that you see here, support our native bees and bumblebee population. It's important to support honeybees as well. However, our native bees, we have more than 300 species of native bees. A lot of people aren't even aware that there's anything other than honeybees. So here are some of Florida's rock stars and some of our keystone plants. There are a lot of different varieties of plants, and I think you'll see they're not only functional, but they're also very beautiful. So the way I'd like to break this down is today we'll talk about 3 groupings of plants. We'll start out with the trees that are keystone plants. Then we'll move on to some of the shrubs, and of course, some of our pretty wildflowers as well. Now, as far as trees go, oaks are far and away the most important keystone trees that we have. They support almost 400 species of caterpillars, so it's really important to have oaks. In addition, the acorns provide food for lots of different wildlife species, including deer, squirrels, and of course turkeys too. And of course the structure of the oak trees provides wonderful nesting opportunities and cover for wildlife as well. In Florida we have a total of 24 oak species. So here are some pictures of 5 of them. In the upper left we have sand post oak, turkey oak, and 2 of our scrub oak species at the bottom, Chapman's oak and myrtle oak. And as I mentioned, there is great oak diversity in Florida. We have 24 different species of natural native oaks here. An oak for every situation. Some are big, some are small. There's other genuses of trees. So in the scientific world, the genus and species is how we identify each individual plant. So plants that are in the cherries, the plums, and the laurel cherry family are also heavy lifters as far as our keystone species. This is a picture of black cherry. This is a tree that's native mainly in north and north central Florida. So we don't really get this one in our area, but there are some native plums, and Carolina laurel cherry also will grow in our area. And they support 247 caterpillar species. So you can see if you plant some of these really important trees, you'll attract a lot of wildlife to your landscape. Our next group of keystone trees are our maples. And we have 2 species represented here. The Florida maple, that reminds me more of a sugar maple. The leaves have kind of more these blocky lobes. And then our more common maple is the red maple that you see behind me. As all our maples, they do change color in the fall. So it's kind of a cool tree for our area. We don't get much fall color in Florida, so we actually do get a little bit with our maple trees. Also, if you look underneath the red maple label, the picture on the left is a picture of maple flowers, which you probably didn't even know the trees had flowers. And they actually attract a lot of different pollinators. So not only do they attract caterpillars, which attract birds, the flowers also attract pollinators as well. And so 171 caterpillar species rely on our maples. And of course, we couldn't forget about our pines. Pines are super common, and we have 3 primary species in our area. The one on the left is the longleaf pine with these giant pine cones. And also they're really easy to identify in the spring because they get this kind of white or silverish bud at the top of the branches. The most common pine that we see is the South Florida slash pine. The cones are a little bit smaller on that one, and the needles are in bundles of 2s and 3s if you look at how they're attached. And on longleaf pine, they're in bundles of 3s and 4s. So if you find a 3, you're like, I'm not sure which species it is, but you can look at the cones and other factors to tell them apart. And of course, the only short needle pine we have in our area is sand pine. And these grow in the highest and driest locations. So if you have a really dry, sunny, hot, sandy location, sand pine would do really well in that situation. And moving on, the elms are also super important. In our area, the only elm that we really see is the Florida elm. And they're real easy to identify because they've got alternating leaves. They've got these kind of toothed leaf margins. And let's see the leaves have these teeth. And they also produce papery seeds that birds, squirrels, and other wildlife will eat. So this is a plant that likes to grow in wetter areas. In our area, we'll usually see them around streams, along riverbanks, ponds, kind of swampy areas. But they can grow in the home landscape too. And last group of trees are our ashes. We have, I think, 4 species that grow in Florida. And in our area, pop ash or Carolina ash is the most common. These are fairly easy to ID. They have opposite leaves. See where they're opposite each other on the stem. And they have an odd number of leaflets for each leaf. And they also produce a copious amount of seeds, as you can see here. So the seeds feed a lot of birds, they feed squirrels and lots of other wildlife. And many different caterpillars also feed on ash trees. This is a tree that really likes wet areas. Oftentimes you'll find them growing in water, and they can actually stand flooding for several months out of the year, so they really like wet areas. So beneath the trees, there's actually a lot of shrubs that are doing a lot of heavy lifting too. So our first most important shrub group is willows. And in our area, the Carolina willow or coastal plain willow is the most common. The willows attract a lot of our native bees with the flowers that they have. That's the flower right there. And also, this is the host plant for the viceroy butterfly caterpillar. So if you want viceroys, you need willows in your landscape or somewhere close by. People always confuse viceroys with monarchs, though, because they're both orange and black. But viceroys have a little bit different markings than monarchs do. Also, 189 other species use willows as a larval host plant. In addition, after the flowers, they produce these kind of wispy white seeds that float in the wind, and a lot of different birds will feed on those. Other birds will also use the seeds to line their nests, so it produces kind of this fluffy down kind of material. And one that we all love, I think, are the blueberries. We actually have some native species of blueberries in Florida. These are just a few, but there are actually many more than what I'm showing up here. On the left is one called deerberry, and you can see the flowers look a little bit like a ballerina dancer, I think. The ones in the middle are Darrow's blueberries, super tasty if you ever find them in the woods. Also sparkleberry at the top, and over on the far right is shiny blueberry. People often don't think of blueberries being black, but the shiny blueberries are also edible too. But my favorites are the Darrows. And they're favorites of a lot of wildlife species as well. One thing that the blueberries do all have in common is they kind of have these sort of bell-shaped flowers. So even though the flowers aren't shown on these, they're very similar to those. And there's a native bee called a blueberry bee that depends on blueberries. So if we don't have blueberries in the wild, we will lose that bee species as well. And I don't think I've ever seen a blueberry bee, so I'd love to see one sometime. Another group that is edible for people as well as wildlife are the blackberries. Blackberries are in the rose family, so the flowers almost look like a wild rose, and they attract lots and lots of pollinators. Of course, the fruit they produce is eaten by many species of wildlife and people too, and the flowers attract just lots of pollinators. And the last group of shrubs that we'll talk about are the salt bushes. You might not be as familiar with this one, but if you ever drive down the interstates in October and November, you'll see little tufts of these fluffy seeds floating through the air, and they're from the salt bushes. Salt bushes actually produce blooms that lots of native pollinators will use. I don't know how many caterpillar species actually utilize these, but Native pollinators will visit the flowers. These are some of the flowers here. And then birds and other wildlife will eat the seeds as well. So it is useful for wildlife too. It's kind of a weedy plant though, so if you plant this in your landscape, you'll probably be pulling these up in your flower beds everywhere. So they are kind of weedy. We've got 2 species in our area. Okay, and we have a whole bunch of wildflowers that are keystone species. The one thing that they all have in common is that they're in the aster family. So asters are the daisy family, so a lot of these flowers look like daisies. The heaviest hitters in the aster family are surprisingly the goldenrods. People always think that hay fever is a result of goldenrods, and that's a myth. The pollen has actually been found to be too large to go deep into your lungs to cause hay fever, so it's probably ragweed that blooms at the same time. So people always shy away from goldenrod because they think it causes hay fever, but it actually doesn't. These all attract a host of butterfly pollinators, also pollinating bees, and some of them support caterpillars, especially the goldenrods. I had to throw a pink tick seed in there because everything's so yellow. But we do have one species that has pink flowers, and that's up in North Florida where that grows. So from this presentation today, we've learned that a lot of our native species have evolved and depend on native plants. Like our Florida scrub jay, who feeds on acorns from some of our scrub oak species. Also today, we've learned that a lot of our specialist native species depend on keystone plants for survival. And as I mentioned, the really good example is the blueberry bee that depends on the deerberry and other blueberries that you see in the center there. But unfortunately, as we all know, native Florida is disappearing really fast. These are some pictures of the same area of Siesta Key here in Sarasota County over time. And you can see in 1948, there was hardly any development there. And you can even see the sand dune lines from where the beach was there. And then slowly, areas started getting cleared, and eventually more houses. And then today, there's hardly any native habitat left in that part of Siesta Key. So it's happening all over Florida, sadly, and other places too. I think it's really important to know that we do have some power. We can be the change that's needed. All we have to do is put some of these keystone plants into our landscape wherever we can. This is a praying mantis on a goldenrod, and as you remember, goldenrod's one of the keystone species. As I like this quote, there's a time to let things happen and a time to make things happen, and I think now is the time. All right, I'll take any questions that you all have at this time. If you would, I would ask you to come up to the microphone if possible so we can capture this on the video recordings. Or I can walk to you, but it's going to be hard for him to follow me. Are you able to come up, Patricia? Okay. Come up to the microphone, please. Okay, hopefully it'll stay. That way you can get it on the video.
In the front?
Right here. You can talk into it here.
Oh, okay. Hi. I'm a native Floridian, and I was born in South Florida and raised in very rural Central Florida because it was a very long time ago. You can't hear me? Okay. All right, should I start over?
Okay. You can hold it close.
Okay. So I was born in Florida and raised in very rural Central Florida. And I was an outdoor kid, couldn't keep me inside. And my very first pet was a gopher tortoise. And I'd sit with him for hours out in the yard, feeding him grass. I'm sorry. I worry now that their habitats are being destroyed, that they're being covered over, and there's no protection for them because builders don't care. And it really worries me. And I just wondered, Jeff, if there's anything being done to protect the gopher tortoise.
Good question. Gopher tortoises, as most of you probably know, are protected in Florida. And so before any development happens, the contractors are required to do a gopher tortoise survey if they have habitat that might support them. They sometimes can pay into a mitigation bank and pay the State Fish and Wildlife Commission to have them relocated, or sometimes they just pave over them. But what happens is they're setting aside land for gopher tortoises, so they have to pay some kind of a restitution, I guess, if they have gopher tortoises. The most preferable thing to do is to develop around where they occur, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes they get relocated to another area, or they just get a take permit and they just pay for areas to be set aside for gopher tortoises. It's not the most ideal thing, but I guess it's better than not doing anything. Can you come up?
Hi, my name's Kathleen, and I would like to know where we could find some more information, particularly if you're interested in gardening. Now, I did not know a lot of this, and I actually had some milkweed growing in this little bit of a garden plot, and it was doing very well, and all of a sudden I noticed it had these caterpillars on it.
Right.
And I thought, oh, nuts, it's going to eat them, and I'm pulling them off and throwing them out.
No, don't do that. Yeah.
But I would love to learn more about it. Are there any courses around, like at STC, or books you could recommend? Something small.
Okay, there's some really good organizations in Florida, especially our local Florida Native Plant Society. We have a chapter in Sarasota that's the Serenoa chapter, and then there's also, if you live further south in Englewood area, there's the Mangrove chapter. So both of those are excellent resources to learn about what our native plants are. Sometimes they actually give some away, so you can add to your garden at the meetings. But it's a really great way to learn about our native plants. There are lots of books also in the libraries that talk about Florida native plants.
Could you repeat the names of the two groups you mentioned?
Sure. The Florida Native Plant Society, so there's the Serenoa chapter, which Serenoa is our saw palmetto, that's the scientific name. And then Mangrove chapter is our South Sarasota County chapter. And there are chapters all over Florida, so no matter where you live in Florida, there's a Native Plant Society chapter in your area.
UF-IFAS is also a good resource.
Yes, I forgot. UF-IFAS has a lot of really good master gardener resources and information on native plants too.
What is the UF-IFAS?
University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. So all we call it is UF-IFAS usually. It's a lot easier.
And do they have a website?
I believe so, yeah. I think you can Google it and you'll find their website.
And the Wildflower Foundation.
Oh yes, and there's another group, the Florida Wildflower Foundation is also a really good resource on learning about native plants too. It's the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Okay, one more.
I just wanted to say that I have my niece is living in England, but she's working on making artificial flowers, 3D flowers, and using certain kinds of paints, experimenting, and scent to attract bees and butterflies. So it's a big world project. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know anything about that.
I will send you the information.
That's awesome. Thank you.